But what ends up happening, I think, is that as you make more and more decisions and as they end up kind of being you get hit for them, it becomes harder and harder to be decisive, right? So then you kind of went for like a quote unquote safer option, and that's when I decided to mix up and go for drive rush throw instead, right? Because you've been blocking for like the last 6 or 7 interactions we had.
Yeah.
So we can talk about some of the like how I do defensive decision making. Let's see. Not sure, but yeah, like if you're considering the options that I could do out of this, then yeah, you would have like a neutral jump would have beaten those options. But you know, if you think I'm gonna go for a meat and try to burn you out here, right? Then level one probably would have made sense, right? It's just
Yeah.
that if the if we're trying to think in like in terms of what the next layer or layer underneath is gonna be, I think it's okay to think about that. But at the same time, if you go too far into what you think I'm going to do versus what I've shown you I can do, that's when you get into situations where it's like, oh, I made a decision that would beat him if he's thinking 3 layers deep, but me as a kind of player, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna overhead you here, right? Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
go for an overhead,
Okay.
right? So like,
Okay, fair.
yeah. So and I guess what I'm getting at is that sometimes like I know, you know, as we get higher, you know, as we become higher level players, we kind of want to establish that we are thinking about all the potential situations that are happening. But you have to remember that like most of those situations aren't going to happen, right? You have to really be deep in the rabbit hole, deep in the set, or something else like that in order for those things to become kind of relevant, right? Like what I think
Yeah.
is like just beat what they've tried to show you so far, right? Like if I haven't shown you run stop and neutral jump yet, like there's no reason to consider that I would do that yet, right? Especially again looking at like higher ranked players, like higher level players, they don't take a lot of risk, right? Like most Kens when you
Yeah.
play them at like 1600 plus, you don't do all the dragon lashes and the crazy raw drive rushes and stuff. For the most part, they're just applying safe pressure when they knock you down, right? And forcing plus frames, right? By pressing
Yeah.
button, trying to frame trap you when they have plus frames. They don't really go for these like crazy home run buttons all the time necessarily. So if you'd consider like this Ken is just gonna come up and do something probably to try to burn me out, what would they do? They'd probably do some sort of run overhead or some sort of button into Jinrai, right? Or something like that, some block string potentially. In that case, level one would have worked fine, right? Or I could have tried to throw you. Level one would have beat that too, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes I think like if you're trying to think too far down and trying to beat what they think they're going to try to beat from you, that's when you get stuck in this like, oh, I'm always feel like I'm taking this high risk, high reward options because I'm like trying to beat 17 different things. When in reality, they just are going to do the simplest possible thing they can do, right? Like sometimes that's what ends
Okay.
up
Okay.
happening.
Okay.
So
Fair enough.
yeah, so like really just making a defensive decision, right? You know your options, you know what's there. So something I'll mention here, but when I'm in the corner, right, and I'm trying to defend against jury pressure, especially, right, because a lot of times jury, you know, they'll just press a bunch of buttons in your face, right, or they'll do like
Yeah.
throw loops with dashes, or kind of set up these sort of tick throw situations, you know, not quite tick throws, but like, you know, jab throw or like those
Yeah.
types of
Yeah.
mix-ups. So what I tend to try to do is I try to pay attention to what the opponent is showing me currently, right? So if they're doing a bunch of like jab into like throw, like, you know, they knock me down, dash up throw, and they're doing throw loops, then I'll consider, you know, delay teching or delayed buttoning to try to beat that, right? So mostly delay tech because I think you can't really shimmy on the forward dash with jury, right? So as soon as you forward dashes, it's really strike throw. You have to kind of guess there.
Yeah.
I think you can maybe neutral jump, but as soon as she dashes, you have to kind of guess, right? You know, strike throw. You can, I think, if you back up potentially, right, you could get something out of that. But anyway, I try to just defend against the things that I've seen so far, right? When I pick a defensive option, what I try to think about is what am I okay losing to, right? Like I've decided I'm going to take a throw here, so let me try to beat every other option that's not a throw, however I can, right? Something like that, right? If that makes sense. I can't. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of like how else I can describe that, but it's like I've decided
Yeah. I
that I'm
get it. I
taking
get
it,
it.
right? So
Yeah.
and that simplifies my mental stack as well and allows me to pay attention to like how the opponent is structuring their offense, right? Because a lot of people, like, as you know, as quote unquote random as this game is according to a bunch of people,
Yeah.
people aren't random, right? Like if they run an offense and they do something that works, 9 times out of 10 they're gonna do it again, right? And again and again and again until it stops working, right? And maybe even not even then, right? Like I'm sure you play people who will always do one thing on offense or they'll always do the same option. Even if you beat them 100 times, they will do it the 101st time, right? So people aren't really that random overall. So you try to beat the options that they're showing you. That's how I look at it. Now, where that gets really hard is when you're playing against something like a Kim or like a Cammy, like high level Kims and Cammies. Dude, I can't, right? Like, it's just like they have so many ways to mix you up, even though it all looks the same and kind of has the same look and feel. Like, it's hard for me because of the way I apply my defense in that way. It's trying to keep track of all of that, right? So a lot of times when I'm playing against characters like that, even against Jury in some cases, I'm just guessing. I'm just like, okay, they've done this the last 1 or 2 times. I'm just going to EXCP. I'm just going to reverse it.
From what I'm getting from you is that, like, I'm trying to think too much of what makes sense to me instead of, like, what the opponent is doing. Yeah, so I think I need to, what you said, like, try to see what they're doing more instead of, like, me guessing what they're going to do.
Yeah, because, like, yeah, 100%. 100%. Because, like, think of it this way, like, risk reward on defense is kind of a crappy proposition, right? So when you're on offense and you run an offense and you quote unquote guess correctly, which basically means you're running an offense that they didn't really stop really get hit by something, your reward can be anywhere from like 3,000 to 6,000 damage to killing them outright or whatever, right? There's a huge reward on offense for being quote unquote correct. But on defense, if you're correct, what happens, right? What do you get? You get out of the corner potentially, right? You don't take any damage, right? Like, let's say you correct on the forward jump because I went for meaty throw. You still get crosscut DP, just like damage, but you're out of the corner, right? But like, that's what I mean, is that like doing a hard read on defense doesn't give you the same reward as a hard read on offense, right? Because like a hard read on offense can win you the game. A hard read on defense, I guess, could prevent you from losing the game potentially, but it's very difficult, right, to equate those two things, right? Like winning the game outright and not losing are not the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that if you decided that you're gonna take slightly less risk on defense, stop trying to guess what I'm gonna do, and just kind of defend against multiple options best you can, I think that will help alleviate some of the mental stack you're feeling, because you're like, oh crap, I have to think about the 17 things that are just gonna come in, and then you get kind of you experience paralysis, right? Analysis paralysis, and you just kind of continue blocking, and that's when you get thrown, right? So you're like, there's no way he throws again, and then he threw again, right? And the same thing happened here. There's no way he shimmies again, and he shimmied again, right? But part of that is just me, and that's just me, Juzzy the player, playing by feel, right? I'm just like, I don't think they're expecting me to do this thing, and that's really the end of where I think, right? For better or worse, right? I'm like, I'm not thinking about I'm not necessarily thinking about like how far down the rabbit hole and the layers that they're going for. Usually when I'm on offense, and I'll talk about this here, I guess. When I'm offense, I'm just trying to consider what options they think I'm going to do and just do the opposite of that, basically, right? So like in that previous scenario, it's like, oh, well, the last time this happened, he threw me, right? Or he did some sort of meaty option, right? So the last thing you were expecting was for me to shimmy again, so I shimmied again, right? Or at least that's my thought process when it comes to offense. And again, it might be a layer underneath, like the layer 2 or whatever you want to call it, or like the next level. But I'm typically not trying to outthink you multiple ways, right? Like, I'm not trying to do that. And maybe that's why I'm where I am, like, in terms of, like, my skill level. But I feel like trying to do more ends up costing me games because I don't do anything eventually, right? So, you know, we talked about that. But again, my application of how I run my defense is the same thing for offense, right? Except on defense, I'm just trying to guess to get out of it. On offense, I'm trying to guess what you don't think I'm going to do. And that ends up being it. So, yeah, I think if you wanted to try to pinpoint it like that, I think I would say you're thinking too hard, right? Because because when you dive that deep into what's happening in terms of like mental stack, what ends up happening is you feel like you went for a read that made sense to you, but didn't make sense to your opponent, so they didn't do that, right? So I think that'll help a ton.